Wow, look at this woman, she is so pretty. I bet you guys anything she is a sweet and open-minded woman who really wants to learn about the world around her without harsh prejudice judgment on all things not suited to her personal desires. So what would you like to talk about? Men's rights activism. What a coincidence. I am a men's rights activist. Oh look, you're an atheist, so am I. Well, that's great news. Then I can explain the men's rights movement and feminism to you from an atheist perspective.
To really understand what the men's rights activists are about, you actually have to look at the history. It really started first cropping up sometime around, I think, the late 60s, early 70s, around the same time as second wave feminism. In regards to careers, women were kind of getting the short end of the stick.
Madam, I don't want you to panic, but you have a bird on your shoulder. I believe it's a green-tailed eye plucker, deadly predators of the outback. My advice is to not alarm it, don't even acknowledge it. It will get bored and leave. Anyway, you think women were given the short end of the stick? Hey, working was an option for them, and while up until 1964, many doors were closed to them, and corporations were more than happy to exploit them, men on the other hand had to work or die of starvation on the streets due to human nature. You see, a pretty little blonde thing like yourself might not be able to pay the rent one day, but with your looks, you are not living on the streets. Walk into a bar, flash that pretty smile of yours, and it is a pretty smile by the way, and you most certainly have a house to stay the night in. Men, no matter how attractive, simply can't live like that. The way Mother Nature wired men and women, makes it that way, so that whole being able to go to a bar, and find someone to take you home, is one of those female privileges that women conveniently overlook, and I'd complain about this horrible injustice, but hey, it's biology, and complaining won't change it. But let's not overlook the fact the privilege is still there. But back to the point, if you think women before the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had it rough when it came to employment, you obviously weren't looking at how men had it. In fact, in pretty much any time period, if you think the women had it bad, just look at what the men were going through, and you'll realize women historically seldom ever got the short end of the stick when all things are considered.
They were kind of the stay-at-home wifeys, couldn't really go out there and have a career. So women finding that it was unfair that they couldn't have careers, men found it unfair for opposite reasons. In part, they found it unfair to be the primary breadwinners, and the idea that they wouldn't have to be the only ones bringing in a paycheck, great.
Well, here's the problem with that. I am sure there are many men who thought they could get away with being the stay-at-home house father, but that ugly biological human nature kicked in, and they quickly realized, it is not female nature to work like a slave, or work like a man I should say, and support a man who parasitically leeches off of her. It simply isn't a woman's nature. And due to human instinct, it simply isn't mandatory. Now many men also don't want to have to work like a slave while a stay-at-home mum parasitically leeches off of him either, but due to that pesky human nature, it isn't a choice. A man is going to work like a slave, no ifs, ands, or buts, about it. He can work or he can starve, that has always been the way. I guess one exception is if he hit the genetic lottery and was born into a wealthy family. But again, that's just a lucky accident few men ever experience. But I'm sure there were many men who thought it would be nice if the wife went out and earned some extra cash to help out, and thought it was horribly unfair that certain opportunities were not available to her, or that she would get paid less. However, the reality of this is that if one wife works, that's great. When they all took up jobs, that doubled the labor pool, thus cut the value and wage of the laborer in half. So ultimately a two-income household was bringing in the same money as a single-income house, but each getting taxed, and this also put a squeeze on job opportunities for men, which hurt a woman's chance of finding a financially stable man that could support her on his income alone. Thus feminism ended up practically forcing women into the workforce like males. Sure, she can still get a free ride in life, but she might have to lower herself to doing things she'd rather not do. If she wants to leech off of a financially stable man indefinitely, she better be damn good looking to bag a rich boy, or be a young 20-year-old who marries a 40-year-old man to support her. Because outside of millionaires' sons, men in their 20s can't really support himself and a woman, and live in any place resembling a safe neighborhood. So ultimately feminism screwed men, and it really and truly screwed women, now forcing them to slave away their youth like a man. No wonder women today are so angry and bitter.
Great! And thus the beginnings of the men's movement was born. Now, the men's liberationists really have two parts to their story. The first being that initially a lot of them really teamed up with the feminists, because feminists have been tackling these gender issues, and a lot of them affected men, but in different ways, much like they still do today.
Madam, I really don't think the people you are referring to as men's rights activists were actually men's rights activists. I think the word you're looking for is male feminist or LGBT. Perhaps some gender ideologues that thought masculinity and femininity were make-believe social constructs without biological basis and fought against gender norms. Today people of that mentality fall somewhere in the feminist, LGBT community, right alongside the flat earth theorists and creationists.
And so they address together these ideas of gender and patriarchy.
Oh, well, there's your proof, you see. An MRA would not embrace the notion that there is a such thing as patriarchy. Patriarchy is a myth that comes directly out of the feminist faith, and isn't recognized by atheists or people with other beliefs. So yeah, I'm pretty sure those MRAs weren't men's rights activists, but simply male feminists. Now it's true that you'll catch an MRA saying patriarchy, but words like patriarchy, rape culture, mansplaining, and other feminist religious phrases are only used by MRAs in a humorous context, the way atheists might make a reference to the devil made me do it or I want my rib back or other jokes in reference to Christianity.
That was all fine and good until roughly the late 70s, early 80s, when the MRAs, as we really know them today, began to emerge. They acted very much in large as opposition to many of the men's liberationists, and definitely as opposition to the feminists. Short story here is that these MRAs often viewed women as almost having too many rights, or more rights than what would be considered equal. And they viewed ideas like chivalry, which have been commonly considered patriarchal, as not patriarchal, but misandric.
Well, of course chivalry wasn't viewed as patriarchal. Again, patriarchy as defined by feminists, as a system that benefits men at the expense of women, doesn't exist. History can disprove the existence of that definition of patriarchy the same way science can disprove the Judeo-Christian tale of Noah's Ark and the Great Flood. Imagine males feeling that chivalry is oppressive and anti-male. Chivalry, when not referring exclusively to a medieval knight, is basically a system where men are to bow down to women, put women ahead of themselves, to pedestalize women, to sacrifice themselves for women. It was a social system that placed women at the front of the bus and the men at the back, a system that degraded males for the pleasure of women. You don't see that as oppressive, really? And you confess there was a such thing as chivalry, yet under the feminist definition of patriarchy, chivalry wouldn't have been males pedestalizing females, it would have been the other way around. So even if there were a patriarchy, chivalry could not be the outcome of such a system. In fact, chivalry sounds like a social system that would benefit women at the expense of men. Now imagine someone opening doors for you the way a chauffeur does for his boss, pushing in your chair for you, throwing his coat in the mud so that you don't dirty your feet, rising out of his seat when you rise, standing up and remove their hat when you enter the room, and other such gestures equivalent to saluting a superior officer, or gestures befitting the job description of servant or slave. You don't think those people who are culturally conditioned to do this, are in any way an oppressed people? You don't see it, really? Well, we'll work on that, but do go on.
They as a group weren't really doing anything to advance men's rights and bring men's issues to the forefront as much as they were countering feminism.
I do declare I am befuddled at this statement. It's a bit like you are saying the American troops in World War II weren't doing so much to protect American soil, so much as they were just attacking the invading military of Japan. Or maybe it's like saying the homeowner wasn't doing so much to safeguard his family, so much as he was fighting against the burglar that broke in. You still don't see it? Well, I've never been good at being subtle, so I'll spell it out for you. Fighting feminism is the one and the only way males can achieve equal rights. You see, men used to have rights, Males had horrible responsibilities that women were exempt from. But they also had special privileges that women were exempt from, because these privileges were typically the outcome of the responsibility. Example, obligation is a responsibility, authority is a privilege. Parents get the privilege of authority over their children, but only due to the fact they are lawfully obligated to protect and provide for the child. Feminists decided that they should have all the privileges that men get, but they should retain their exemption from the responsibilities that afford those privileges. And of course, because men have always been more than willing to give women whatever they want, reasonable or not, the feminists succeeded in getting all of this. The end result over time became males having lots of responsibilities with no privileges, and women having lots of privileges with no responsibilities. Not only did these feminists want male privileges, and to be exempt from male responsibility, they also wanted to retain their female privileges and walk away from their female responsibilities. And that's how men lost their rights. Some people think male rights were written on a piece of paper, and some congressman left the papers in a cab by accident, and they've been lost ever since. But that's not how it happened. Some people think that male rights were written down and someone spilled their coffee on the paper, and that's how men lost their rights. Some people think men just misplaced them and can't find them. Try checking under the sofa, is a common claim. However, it was feminism that took away men's rights. Nothing more, and nothing less. So the one and the only possible way for men to get their rights back, is to defeat the feminists that took them in the first place, and is continuing to stop males from having rights.
I'm not going to say that there aren't issues that the men's liberationists or MRAs have been talking about that affect men disproportionately. So whether that be child custody, alimony, domestic violence, and rape, they're all very, very unique problems in their own way that impact men, but MRAs today, they're not really addressing that.
Actually we are. Those are some of the primary concerns. We try our best to combat these things. There is a men's group at UTF in Canada, and the feminists are doing everything they can to shut them down. After feminists within the student union illegally pulled a fire alarm, they addressed the MRAs outside and said things like,
obviously can't like
So, number one, shut the fuck up for a second. Feminists do not want you to lose custody of your children. The assumption that women are naturally better caregivers is part of patriarchy.
This is the feminist answer to all questions. Patriarchy makes men get drafted but not women. Patriarchy awards child custody to women. Patriarchy makes it difficult for males to report rape and abuse. Feminism is what took away male rights. Feminism is what prevents men from getting them back. And feminists avoid responsibility for this by claiming it's all patriarchy. When you name specific examples of feminist organizations protesting and boycotting any male effort to gain rights and theoretically fight this mysterious patriarchy, the MRAs are called misogynists, rape apologists, and told to check their privilege and every other conceivable silencing tactic, including both the threat and use of violence, and appeals to authority figures that they are the ones that feel unsafe and afraid of MRAs, and something needs to be done to shut down MRAs. They act like any other group of religious zealots not wanting to let go of their beliefs or privileges. Another technique that has become commonplace is to deny there even is a men's rights movement, or to dismiss it because it hasn't achieved enough to be considered legit, or claim that the MRM cannot be in favor of equality because the pursuit of gender equality is exclusively feminist domain and everything else is patriarchy.
For example, instead of actively trying to address a certain need for men, such as rape and domestic violence towards men, which is very underserved, as many of you know, instead of maybe creating a shelter or a safe space at a shelter specifically for them, they focus more about complaining about the women's shelters and how they don't help men.
Google Earl Silverman. Look, I could go on and on about all the legitimate efforts by MRAs to do these things, and how the governments of countries time and time again tell them because they are catering to males, and males don't count as a protected class of people, they are not given funding, and how feminists and the domestic violence industry work to make it this way. But it's getting late, you've had a bit much to drink, I wouldn't want to take advantage, it's not you, it's me, I'm bad news baby, I would only break your heart.